you do hear the alarm, please make your way to Great Bridgewater Street, which is to the left of the building. You'll be ushered to the meeting point. Ladies and gents are just through that door there as well. As you're aware, all 15 members have now been formally appointed by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to the Scrutiny Committee. So your first task at this meeting is to appoint a chair. So I'd like to ask, let's wait for Councillor Ali. Hi. Are there any nominations this afternoon for the position of chair for this committee going forward? Councillor Howard.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Is that working now?
You might have to try the one next to you.
On the left or the... Thanks very much indeed. As members will know, I made a nomination previously and I want to honour that nomination, and I'm going to nominate Councillor Mark Hunter. And my reason for that is because Mark Hunter has had parliamentary experience on business and enterprise issues, and I just feel that that would lend itself extremely well to the team of this Scrutiny Committee. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Do we have any further nominations?
Sorry. I'd like to nominate Councillor Mike Holly from Rochdale. Although we're in different parties, I have a huge respect for him. He's our chair of Overview Scrutiny, and he's always got along very well with the Labour, which is the leading party. And he's also on the bodies that I'm on, to do with generation, regeneration, business skills, etc.
Thank you very much. Would you just turn your mic off?
Can I second? Do you need seconds?
Not at this point, Councillor Walker.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations at all? Okay, hearing none, could I please ask that you indicate, show if you're in favour of Councillor Hunter for the position of chair. Please could you indicate? 2. Thank you. And those in favour of Councillor Holly, could you please indicate clearly? I get that as 12 and 2. Okay, Councillor Holly, congratulations. Please would you like to come and take the hot seat next to Susan? And welcome to the position of chair.
Well, first of all, can I thank you for voting for me. Those who didn't vote for me, that's fine. You know, obviously we all get on well together. This committee to me is so important in terms of going forwards, that the scrutiny has worked well in the past, and at Greater Manchester Combined Authority level and AGMA level. And clearly there's a lot to be done, particularly in the earlier years, but I'm sure going forwards as well. So. And the other thing, I guess, which is so important to me personally, which we have in Rochdale, I have to say, is these committees should be apolitical. You know, it's to hold the executive to account, and it's not about politics. So hopefully we can keep politics out of this as much as we possibly can do. There will be certain things that will be said, I'm sure, you know, maybe even by myself, but that is the general tenet in it. And I hope we have some wonderful scrutiny. You know, go over the next, you know, the period to the end of this current. Council year. So, without more ado, I'll go into the agenda. Apologies for absences. So I forgot all about that. I should have read this. But as I've only just been appointed, you can excuse me, I'm sure. If decided, it says sure, please call for nomination for the position of Vice Chair. So I suppose the first question is, the way in which it's worded, we will decide if we want a Vice Chair first of all. So, I mean, I think in the past we've had Vice Chairs of this Scrutiny authorities. I think it's an important function to have, and I certainly would vote for a vice chair, because that's only my personal view. So can we vote whether or not we actually want a vice chair? All those in favour?
Unanimous.
Unanimous, that's good. So can I call for nominations for the position of vice chair? I would like to nominate Mark Hunter, Councillor Mark Hunter.
Thank you. Yeah. Point of order, Chair, there ought to be a gender balance. There ought to be a gender balance here. So if you're the chair as a male, then I think we should have a female.
That is what we can't do, unfortunately. It might be something we should be reflected upon for next year, perhaps, you know, in terms of the balance within, assuming the political situation doesn't change, of course.
What happens if we did elect a woman?
Sorry.
They wouldn't be able to chair the meeting because the legislation is quite clear. You have to be from a party that is not the same party as the mayor, and it's all the female members of this committee are from the Labour Party. That wouldn't be possible.
But I have to say that's not ideal. So I think.
Since when do we all do as we're told? We're supposed to be scrutiny committee, and we're doing as we're told right from the beginning. I just think, you know, I find it extraordinary that when the committee itself isn't gender balanced, and now we can't even have. Oh, then you have two vice chairs. Then have two. You know, because it seems that today we're coming in here to do an important job, and we're already getting off on the wrong foot.
Unfortunately, it's a legislative requirement that that the chair is an appropriate person. It's a matter for, you know, for those appointed to the committee.
Councillor Hunter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't want to prolong the debate about it, but as I understand it, and the legal advice that's been circulated is quite clear, it does have to be a member of one of the parties that's not the same party as the mayor, so that's simply the law. There's not a great deal we can do about it today. But for what it's worth, I have already flagged up to the mayor himself a dissatisfaction about the process. I know it was our first year, and I think we all felt a dissatisfaction about the process in which members were selected to be put forward from their respective parties. And the key point I made to him was that in terms of opposition members on this committee, it meant there was absolutely no gender balance from opposition members. And if the parties are more involved in the process next time, as I understand from the Chief Executive and from the Mayor they will be, then hopefully we can do this better and get it right next time. The point is well made, and it is frankly not acceptable to not have.
I couldn't agree more, but, you know, but we've got the legislation in place. That's what it has to be. And I think for next time round, it's incumbent upon the non-Labour members to make sure that there is, you know, appropriate gender balance. And you know, it wasn't thought through. The process that we've been through, I agree entirely with Councillor Hunter. It wasn't satisfactory. Let's be honest about it.
Just for the clarity, I mean, the legislation is rather ambiguous in terms of laying it out that you have to appoint a chair or you have to appoint a vice chair, and some of these there is ambiguity and anomalies there in terms of interpretation and expanding, you know, how the legality works. So my colleague here talked about equalities and redressing the gender balance in everything we do, in whether we formed new committees or new institutions such as the combined authorities. So right from the start, I think we should actually advocate and be an exemplar of you know, boardroom participation. You know, I've often said in meetings, you know, white, male, and pale, stale rather. Sorry, that's excuse the pun, but that's where we are. So it's not, as you say, it's not entirely, scripted in the legislation. You can interpret it as you wish. That's my way of interpreting the legislation. Thank you.
I mean, I'm relying upon the guidance that we've all been circulated with. So I think, it'd be, not wise to go against that advice that we've actually got. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Just to be clear, the position of chair has to be an opposition member. In relation to vice chair, if you were to appoint a Labour member, it really would defeat the purpose of substituting in the event of the absence of the chair. So it would be purely nominal if you were to appoint a Labour member as a vice chair, because they wouldn't be able to do the job you wanted them to do. So the advice is that it needs to be an opposition member.
Yeah. Councillor Holder, then Councillor Fletcher Hackwood.
I am very new to the exalted heights of the combined authority. I do have one question in my mind about this very long and passionate discussion about gender balance. Would the gender of a member of this committee materially affect their ability to scrutinise, to present the output of that scrutiny? Or should we really stop worrying about this and just get on with the job that we were tasked for? Because I'm sorry, I'm an old man, and I've always felt that gender was a blessing rather than a qualification.
Can I respond to that?
Councillor, yeah. Fletcher Hackwood, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I think we may need to recommend Councillor Holden a reading list regarding the underrepresentation of women in public life. What I was going to suggest is that can we make a recommendation from this committee for future reference that the local authorities who are blessed with members from a different party of the mayor, that when they're recommending, appointing, whatever members to this committee, that from those opposition parties, that they bear that in mind. Would that help?
I've actually said that we will do that. Actually, I think it's incumbent on us to do that. Actually.
Without going on too long, we have a gender balance from Berry here. 1 female and 1 male, as we did last meeting, and I'm here. So I'll leave it at that. One thing I can suggest to be constructive, though, you could have a female vice chairman or vice chairperson, anything else, who consults with the chairman, works with the chairman, is consulted by officers if he happens to be in Tenerife, whatever. But when it comes to actually a meeting, perhaps ill and can't get to, then someone from the meeting chairs it, and it could be a male person for that meeting for 2 hours. So there is a way around it if you think about it, if you really want this. My own ward, we have 2 females and me. I'm still there. Soon it'll be 3 females when I give up, but after 40 odd years. But people keep re-electing these males like me, I'm afraid. Anyway, I don't think it's a thing for a big argument at the first proper meeting, but I think councils do nominate and think about gender balance, but we don't, as opposition, have many people to go at. Do you see what I mean? There's only 1 of me, so we can't distribute it very widely to male and female. Thank you.
Councillor Brotherton.
Sorry.
Female, come
Thank you. Me. Sorry, I was going to just support what Councillor Walker said. I think that's a reasonable compromise for the time being. But I think if we do that, we also, as you said, Chair, right to, it's not the mayor, is it, whoever does the legislation, to say the present situation is not really acceptable, and we really ought to strive for gender balance if we can. But I think if Councillor Walker wants to move that, I'd second it, because I think for this year, it would be right to have a vice chair. Admittedly, unfortunately, the lady couldn't take the meetings because of the legal requirements, but as he said, there's no reason why the vice chair couldn't liaise with you and the other vice chair about the content of the agenda and so on. It's just about chairing the meetings, isn't it? Not that they could
I'll come back to that in a moment.
I agree with that compromise, basically. And I agreed with Councillor Grace Fletcher, what she said and that you said, that on this occasion we can't because it's under legislation. But in future, we should ask, if there are 4 authorities that are sending members of the opposition to the party of the mayor, then they should get together and try and make sure that at least 2 of them are female, so that we have a choice of a vice chair, a female vice chair.
I mean, there's a well-made point. The only thing I would say, at least in terms of the composition of the committee generally, it's a lot better than it was last year. And last year, I think the figures here up, it was 37% last year were females, and across all 3 committees is now 49%.
It might be 51.
Yeah. So at least that bit's been recognised, but unfortunately, what's not been thought through is the issue that we've got with regards to the nomination of chairs and vice chairs. So if we, sorry.
It may or may not be helpful, Chair, but if you forgive me for having a second go, I think what we're dealing with here is the law of unintended consequences. I don't think this had been fully thought through in the first place. And as I said in my earlier comment, it has already been raised, not least by me, but I'm sure by others, to the Chief Executive and to the Mayor, to say this is something that needs to be put right next year. We can all say what our gender balance is on our respective councils and what we've done in our respective groups. Lib Dems only had 3 nominations, 1 for each scrutiny, 2 are men, one's a woman. You know, once the numbers change for all of us, there is more of an opportunity. But the key thing is the parties are entitled to these places on scrutiny committees as of right. It's not the gift of the mayor or anybody else, they're entitled to them. And my point was very simple, that if the parties were consulted at an earlier stage, then we could have liaised across the local authorities with one another to make sure that the nominations made did respect gender balance. It's not beyond the wit of any person to see that point, and it frankly is unacceptable in this day and age that we haven't done that. But as I say, I don't believe it was done deliberately. I think it is unintended consequences. I have to say, and I'm not just saying it because you kindly nominated me as vice chair, but I think the suggested so-called compromise is completely unworkable. I really don't see how that would be anything other than a tokenistic gesture. But that's a personal view and may have cost me support for my nomination. But I think we are where we are and we just have to deal with it.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering, and I'm not sure if this is how it works on this scrutiny committee, but one of the things that we've done in Wigan is have task and finish groups on specific projects and areas that we want to really explore in a lot of detail. And, you know, you might want to consider the gender balance of that, or you might want to get, you know, some of the brilliant women we've got in the room to lead and champion that and bring back recommendations to this group.
I mean, the answer to that particular point, certainly one of the things envisaged for this group is our task and finish groups. And we do them in Rochdale as well, and they work exceedingly well. And I think we could possibly address, you know, because obviously the chair of each of those groups, you know, can obviously be, you know, it shouldn't be, in fact, in my view, the chair or the vice chair. So we can possibly attack this gender balance issue. In terms of important positions through that route. What is the general view amongst this committee? You know, given, if you like, what we've said, what Councillor Hunter said, you know, the legal advice that we've got, the pragmatic sort of solution, you know, that we've got from 3 councillors in terms of the way forward, really. You know, I suppose we can do what we want in one sense, but then we haven't got an actual vice chair in place.
Can we take a decision as to whether you want a vice chair?
Yes. Well, that's true, of course. But given, if you like, all has been said. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor there, please, first. Yeah. I couldn't. That's a help, actually. Yeah. Councillor Howarth.
Thank you. What I'm going to do myself, and that's why I just want to very quickly say this, is I'm going to follow the legal advice because I feel more comfortable doing that. And I don't want anybody to take any inference from how I vote to be suggestive of the fact that I'm anti, of course, having as much involvement from women in public life and certainly in local government and so on. But I just feel more comfortable following the legal advice, and hopefully as time moves forward, that will be sorted out, and women who come here will be eligible to take the positions that they'd like to. Thank you.
Very quickly, Chair, I apologise for dwelling on this. If we decide not to have a vice chair, that's legally acceptable, isn't it? So then in the case that you're on, somebody mentioned Tenerife, somewhere, right, then amongst our lot, we can have a vice chair as and when required to fill that gap, or such emergencies and whatever. Can that happen legally? That's my question.
In the absence of the chair, you would appoint a chair for the meeting, but they should also satisfy the requirements for an appropriate person.
I'm going to propose another avenue, that we ask the representatives of the opposition if they would go back to their councils and ask if they could consider replacing themselves with a woman representative.
The trouble with that is it's a whole process to go through. So if you change the nomination, they're then going to go back through the combined authority to get approval. That's one of the reasons why.
It didn't take long to put the extra people on the board. So I would have thought changing somebody wouldn't take that long either.
Months. Took months. And you had to satisfy 100% attendance requirement last year.
So given where we are at the moment, you know, we're into October, and the last meeting I think is scheduled for April. I think to do that, you know, it's not practicable really. I mean, I think the answer is we actually voted for a vice chair. I think that we've got the legal advice. I think it's important to have a vice chair in place. Actually, I have to say, we've got the legal advice. I'm disappointed that we haven't thought it through, but I agree with Councillor Hunter. The process was flawed to make sure that there was one member from the four who could be chair or vice chair. At least one was from was female, but we are where we are. I think, you know, with this for this year, I think, you know, my view would be we have to follow the legal process, and we could either go back and say, well, we don't want a vice chair, which I don't think is a good idea. But I think that it is incumbent upon us, as I said before, that we make sure that for next year that it is thought through in terms of the gender balance. All a bit unfortunate, really. So can I ask for, you know, first of all, then some more nominations, because that's what we've actually agreed on for vice chair. Anybody else? Can I ask for somebody to second? Councillor? Yeah. Yeah. Fine.
Thank you. Delighted to second Councillor Hunter.
All those in favour? All those against? Well, that is passed, and I understand why, you know, it's difficult situation, but thank you for that. Right, apologies for absence.
We haven't got any apologies today.
Good. Declaration of interest. Any declarations of interest? And if you've got any, can you make sure you fill out the form that's in the pack?
Can I also just ask that if anyone's not completed their register of interest, that they do so and pass it to me, please?
Can we now move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which were held on the 8th of September? And if we can go through first of all for factual accuracy. Is there any comments anybody wants to make in terms of factual accuracy? In that case, can we then turn the pages for any action points, make sure that we've actually actioned them? So under E4, there were 4 resolutions, and I think all that those have been done. That officers share deal with decisions made by the GMCA which are classified as urgent and therefore ineligible for calling with scrutiny members. How is that going to be done? Is that by emails?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's under control. The next thing we resolved under item E6, The committee, we endorsed the Greater Manchester Strategy Annual Performance Report. We noted the contents of the refreshed GMS, and we agreed the first full draft of the GMS implementation plan. The next image is from myself. There was some issue with regards to some inconsistencies on GVA growth. And I have spoken to the officers in Rochester. I only picked up Rochester, there might be other areas as well. And I think some of the figures are a little bit sort of, well, ambiguous. And a good example would be, I don't want to go through all the detail because I'll pick this up at Rochdale level and then with the officer concerned. But we were looking at things for full-time employment figures. And JD Sports have got a massive plant of warehouse in Rochdale. But because JD Sports is based in Bury, the figures for that particular factory allegedly or apparently get included in the Bury figures, not in the Rochdale figures. So I think that there's an issue, there's a potential issue there with regard to some of these figures, which I will take on board with the officers of both Rochdale and GMCA.
Yeah.
Oh, you're there? Yeah.
I'm hiding in the corner.
I've asked if I can share the email with you, so we'll pick that up after the meeting.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah. I suppose to say with regards to local authority level data, there was a health check on that report because some of it is influenced by those sort of cross-boundary issues. But
exactly
the more we can work with local officers to understand those, to be able to correct Greater Manchester figures, the better.
Agreed. The early years digitisation pilots were going to be updated at a future meeting, so that will be on the action list. And the internationalisation strategy we consider as a future agenda item. Again, that's on the action list. So going on then to E7, resolve the report we noted and consider a future report on how GMCA are addressing the challenge of how low skill and long-term unemployed. That's got to come back here as well, but we haven't got a date for that either yet. No. The item of E8, the item on productivity, I've been sent a summary email of that, which was exceedingly helpful, actually. And I just wondered if that should be circulated to all members. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's a starting point. It identifies and recognises, what needs to be done in various sectors, and it was very, very helpful, actually. And then the GM Digital Skills Programme is going to be circulated.
Yes, apologies, members. This was an oversight. I have now rectified that. Hopefully you'll be getting that this afternoon, but sincere apologies, it should have happened.
And the work programme, obviously, that's on the agenda for today. Yeah. So are there any other matters arising that members want to raise? Thank you. So we can go on from there then. So the next item on the agenda is the GMCA cultural funding and the Section 48 AGMA grants, and this report of Councillor Cliff Morris.
Just to explain, this is Mary Claire Daly, who's a policy officer who works on culture, and Cliff is the portfolio holder. I'm the lead chief exec for culture. But just by way of an introduction, we asked people in Greater Manchester, why do you live in Greater Manchester, and what do you like about Greater Manchester, as part of the Greater Manchester strategy plans, really. And the first thing that they come up with was culture. So culture is a massively important issue for our residents. It's also, I think, the second largest growth sector in terms of jobs within our conurbation. So massively important. We will all have been aware of the Section 48 grant funding that we had previously. Cliff asked us to have a look at that and took it back to our GMCA, the leaders on the GMCA, and they have gone out to consultation, asked residents what they think of a different scheme, which will have a different way of measuring it, based not just on kind of fiscal impact, but also on the kind of wider socio-economic impact. So Marie Claire's going to take us through what people said.
Hi everybody. So basically, in terms of background, we thought, or it was agreed that we should go out to consultation, and there were two things that we needed to consult on, and that was the proposed closure of Section 48, which is the AGMA run grant scheme, and then what would be the best priorities to assess and appraise the new grant scheme on. And so in conversations that we'd had with people, it was felt that actually the Section 48 criteria was largely strong, and there was nothing there that we'd want to get rid of, but actually things have moved on a little bit since 2015, and in 2015, when the fund was the last round of the fund, it was very much about GVA, and organisations who could demonstrate their contribution in terms of GVA were scored more highly than those who could demonstrate impact against the two other criteria. So what we've done is we've changed the way, or what we went out to consultation on was to change the weighting. So actually there were 4 criteria. One of them was still GVA, because that's incredibly important. One of them was about skills and education. One of them was about community cohesion. And the final one was about kind of social impact. And we felt that those 4 things really got to the heart of what culture could bring, and different cultural organisations, different scales of cultural organisations could bring to Greater Manchester. So we went out to consultation, and the consultation was in 2 parts. So there was an online consultation, and there were 4 events that we held throughout the Combined Authority. One was in Bolton, one was in Wigan, one was in Manchester, and one was in Oldham. So we tried to get a decent geographic spread, bearing in mind capacity and the amount of people who might turn. So what we asked people really was, do you have any concerns about the closure of Section 48? Is there anything that you think that we should be mindful of? What are the equality implications or diversity and equality implications of closing Section 48? And basically, what have people's experiences, either as recipients of the fund or as people in districts who have engaged with recipients of the fund? So we got a sense of actually how Section 48 was delivering, what was good, what we might change. And running alongside that was okay, well, actually, the new Culture Fund, how can we make that as strong as possible? How can we build on the strengths of what we've already got? Because what we didn't want to do was completely reinvent the wheel, throw baby out with the bathwater. We wanted to be really mindful of the impact on organisations who currently receive, but we did want to open it up to a wider group of organisations as well. And so we consulted on kind of how best to make that transition, what we should keep, what's good, whether people agreed that the 4 proposed criteria were largely correct. And so I think in terms of broad themes, what came out was that people thought that it was okay for us to close Section 48 as long as we replaced it with something suitable. And the general consensus again was that the new proposed Culture and Social Impact Fund was a suitable alternative. What really came through in the consultation that was really, really interesting, and this was both at the events and in the online submissions, was a tension between larger organisations who are in receipt and smaller organisations who said it feels like there isn't a regular change to the portfolio, that it's difficult to get into the portfolio, and yet we have to be mindful of the fact that those in the portfolio currently rely very heavily on that funding. So what we've tried to do is take a really, really balanced approach, be open and transparent, have conversations with people, speak to organisations who are in the portfolio, organisations who currently aren't, and find out how we can put together the best process to get the best future portfolio funding for residents across Greater Manchester. How can we balance that in terms of geography, in terms of art form, in terms of diversity, in terms of delivery? And so we have fed all of the information that we got from the consultation into the application form and the guidance, which were launched last Friday, and we will be running some sessions with some open sessions open to residents, cultural organisations, to try and answer any questions, because what we are mindful of is that there are some larger organisations who are very, very good at writing applications, who have staff to write applications, and that actually we need to be supporting those who are doing brilliant, brilliant work, but actually that might not be their skill. So we're offering that as a thing over the next 3 weeks before the deadline, which is the 4th of November, I think.
Any questions? Okay. Councillor Hunter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think this is a good report, and I agree with the general direction of travel, and the officers have given us a lot of interesting detail there. I'm just a little concerned about, well, it's para 3.4 in the report, where it talked about the consultation, which is now taking place in August and September, and the fact that it was only 4 out of the 10 boroughs. And I'm tempted to ask, what about the other 6 others? Particularly as the 4 chosen, it seems to me one could argue are fairly self-selecting and have vested interests. So if you've run a consultation in Bolton, I guess the Octagon would have figured prominently. If you've run one in Oldham, I guess the Coliseum might have figured prominently. In Manchester, you'd have had half the list were vested. But, you know, we are 10 districts, not 4, and it might be a bit late. I don't know if anything more can be done about it. I'm sure you will probably tell us that there was an opportunity for those other organisations, those other districts to contribute to the debate and discussion. I'm sure you're going to tell me that. But you actually had 4 consultation events. And my question really is, I realise it would have been more work and taken more time, but surely if we're trying to be fair to everybody across the conurbation, we should have had 1 in each district.
Can I just add to that? That when the Great Place project takes place, which will inform the future funding, can we take on board, if you like, Councillor Hunter's observation, at least in that exercise, we actually carry out further consultation, and including all of the authorities, really. Each authority have got different demands, different needs, etc.
So, as you expected, I will come back and say, yes, we did. So basically, in terms of communication of the events, so what we tried to do in designing the events, it wasn't actually about where organisations are based, it was about a general geographic spread across. So we tried to go for 4 because we knew that we had limited capacity to deliver these, and we did. There were only so many that we could hold. And there was also only so much interest in attending these sessions. But what we did do is we spoke directly with the cultural officers in every single one of the 10 districts, and we asked them to push it out to their networks, and they had individual conversations. And actually, and I can provide a breakdown of who attended which sessions, but what we did have was people coming from Rochdale to a session elsewhere, people coming from, you know, Salford to Manchester. So while I admit, you know, to hold 10 sessions probably would have been the ideal way to do it. But actually, when you look at who attended and where we got responses from, so also on the online, we had an option to fill in which district you're from. And so we can provide analysis of actually who responded, and some districts didn't respond at all to the online consultation. Some, you know, I can provide more detail about the breakdown of respondees, but I absolutely take your point.
Thank you, Chair. Partially my question's been answered, but I think, like you said, it is a teething exercise, and in future perhaps you need to communicate more the existing, like GMCVOs and the community voluntary organisations, so it penetrates in the community of the 10 combined authorities. So it's a start. And also, when you say you're going to celebrate diversity, perhaps the landscape of the population, we need to consider in terms of there are different cultures, and we celebrate cultures in every communities, and that would be a plus for this round. Thank you.
And so on your point about GMCVO and the different voluntary organisations, we actually made a targeted communications drive through those networks as well. So as well as speaking to the district officers, we did speak to, and we asked them to push it out through their networks across the 10 districts. In terms of diversity in the application form, what we've actually asked is really specifically about both protected characteristic groups that organisations engage with, and also socioeconomic as well, so we can get that balance, and diversity is written in there explicitly and transparently as one of our balancing criteria. So when we get to building that portfolio across Greater Manchester, we would expect to see as broad a diversity as is possible with the applications that have come in and with the money that is available.
Yeah. Right. Just to assure you that the first part of the consultation every local authority with their Section 48 representation. That's where it started. It started with them because they're the ones that we felt understood the Section 48, and we also decided that they would have a future role by monitoring it. It's, you know, so every local authority is represented on that. So I assume that those local authority members report back to their local authority.
Thanks, Cliff. There is also a group called the What Next group, which I think you will all have representatives on of your culture and arts organisations, and Cliff and I were invited to speak to them in Manchester as part of the consultation process, and they had some fantastic ideas. They really did. I was just going to, can I be a bit controversial and throw something in? I was just going to ask the question, and maybe it's not for this particular meeting, maybe it's for a future one, but is that amount of money enough, given the significance of arts, given the significance of how it can transform lives and turn around communities? You know, this is a really tiny amount in the scheme of things. If you think of what the GMCA puts into things like transport, economic development, housing, is this enough, or should we really be putting forward a recommendation for the CA to look at maybe looking at this as a very tiny amount, really? Could they up it?
Absolutely, Chair. I mean, one of the rationale in terms of health and social care, culture becomes integral part of people's livelihoods and in their own space. So if somebody actually is suffering from dementia or somebody is suffering some form of illnesses, and their culture plays a major part in their lives, so they can have that leisurely pursuit to get better. So certainly you need to up the game and double that figure.
I don't want to get too involved in who was there and what gender or anything else, what race and so on. I don't know if anybody was there from Bury, but it works out the consultation, whoever they were, there was about 5 people, if that, at each meeting. So I don't think that's very widespread. I didn't know about it, and I'm not criticising, perhaps that's my fault. But when you say the other thing, so I do think it needs to be more widely spread and get more people involved. How you do it won't go into now, but I certainly think I don't think councillors were informed, for example, and we are multipliers, but the money, if you ask people in Bury, gave them this list and said, do you think that's enough? I'd say too much, because it doesn't mention it. Now, I know people from Bury go to the Bridgewater Hall and so on. We do as well, included. But you know what I mean? If you look, the Derby Hall isn't on there, the Bury Metro Arts and the Ramsbottom Theatre and so on. There's nothing. So if you just gave us the list without knowing the number of people who use these and where they come from, I'm sure somewhere like the Bridgewater Hall knows my postal address. You know, they could work out without too much doing the regular people who come, where they come from, Altrincham, Bury, wherever. So some of them not even from Greater Manchester, people we tend to talk to at the coffee break. But this could be worked out to show it's serving the whole of Greater Manchester. But if you just gave people in Bury this list, I think the answer would be you're spending too many millions. And the other thing I started with, I think if I had consultation in our town about a footpath and we only got 5 people there, I wouldn't think it was very good. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
So in total, it was there were actually around 50 at the 4 events. So that's more than 5. It's about 10. No,
it's
not an
from
awful
10
lot.
boroughs, because you said some in Oldham might come from Rochdale. And
absolutely.
So it's
and then
only...
there was the online, but basically what I take your point.
Right, thanks.
But we did communicate it as widely as we could, and through the Statutory Functions Committee, where we do have the kind of representatives of councillors, we did have individual conversations with those councillors, and I think it's very, very difficult, and we will learn from this. In terms of the breakdown, we have those figures. So current Section 48 recipients, as every year, are asked to tell us, break down where their audiences come from. So we have got a kind of aggregate of where the audiences are. So we can provide that information. This was literally just where the money has gone last, or where the money was allocated last time. And we can tell you where the audience benefit was.
Postcode analysis.
Yes, through that.
Yeah.
But as I said, geography is going to be a major balancing criteria. So that's geography on 2 levels, which is location of organisation and also benefit to audiences. So we're going to look at it in a dual way to try and get the best spread of funded activity in districts, but also that benefits districts, because it's a kind of two-way thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was me you wanted, wasn't it? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. My background is in the arts, so if you ask me if we get enough money, I would always say no from a personal point of view. But I think it's quite interesting looking at your survey, because it seems to me that it's trying to balance between culture for growth, culture for the financial benefits it brings, but also culture for its transformative benefits. And I wonder if there's any weighting in that. Is there any thought gone into about how much each of those is important and the value that brings? But somebody else mentioned about, you know, when you talk to people, you know, I represent a ward with a huge amount of poverty, and they would probably, their gut reaction would be, no, we shouldn't be spending any money on the arts. But if I say to them, you know, I'm trying to set up a fishing club at the moment. If you want money for a fishing club, yes, I want that. That's great. That's really important. So it's perhaps a little bit of trying to convey that message about the importance of the value that the culture brings to them.
So definitely, in terms of the Great Places project that has been mentioned, that's our really kind of deep research programme, and what we're going to do is we're going to go out to not just the 10 districts, but with wards identified within those districts that represent different types of ward and different types of community, community of interest and community of location. And we're going to find out what the people of Greater Manchester actually want, what they view as culture, because there are so many definitions. I mean, what we're looking at here is kind of your typical publicly funded culture. That isn't necessarily what people do, what people value, but we're not in a position at the moment until we've completed that research to really overhaul this. So in 2 years' time, we think that we will be in a position when we've spoken, and it takes a long time, that kind of research, to go out and really have those conversations, but it is going to be on a kind of conversational basis. It's going to be done in collaboration with all of the kind of district officers, but then also through just direct communication with people as well, because there's the how do you know a community that you don't already know, and obviously there are networks who are plugged in to local authorities and there are networks who aren't, and so what we're going to try and do is open the conversation up as much as possible with a view that in 2 years' time we will actually have a genuine understanding of what people want and how we can better support what people want. At the moment, it feels like to make any of those kind of decisions would be a little bit like damaging the current ecology, and you have to bear in mind that if there is any reduction in funding or disinvestment in any of these organisations, that is jobs, that is programmes of activity not happening, that is things that need to be planned. So we have to be really, really mindful of where we are until we're ready to go out confidently with that kind of evidence base about what people want. So the longer term view is to be better. This is the best we can do now, I think would be fair to say.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just picking up on that same point, I think at our inaugural meeting we discussed at some length about arts, culture and leisure being intertwined, and whilst this funding is specifically for arts and culture, I'm sure there is a great deal of crossover with the leisure industry, particularly in Greater Manchester, where we have a particular heritage of great leisure facilities and teams and sports and things going on. On another point, it's welcome to see the changing criteria moving away from the GVA to also seeing how positive impact can be made on certain societies, because I'm sure certain investment in one particular well-established area may not have the same GVA, or may have a greater GVA than somewhere in a deprived area. So it's certainly something to take in. The improvement in society and people's lives is definitely something to take into account. And as regard funding, if we're going to make that improvements within those deprived areas, it's certainly going to require extra funding.
Thanks, Chair. About, I think, probably 25 years ago, I had some peripheral involvement with the Section 48 grants, and part of the problem then was that people who weren't on the list complained that the money went to the same organisations year after year. And looking at the list on Annex A, I recognise many of the names that were on that list 25 years ago are still there. The problem is, the only way to get round that is you've got to take somebody off the list, and then there's an outcry because obviously somebody's going to probably even close down because they don't get any grants from Section 48. So it always was a dilemma, and the only way around that really is to increase the amount of money that's available to everybody. Unfortunately, given the financial situation we're all in, I wish you luck with that. But I really think that, you know, it's a difficult problem. I think it is worthwhile increasing the money because people do tend to think of culture. I think it was Bismarck who said, when I hear culture, I reach for my revolver. I think a lot of people do think it, like the lady over there said, it's nothing to do with me, but it does help the economy. I don't want to mention another theatre. We've got a theatre in Sale, but it benefits all the restaurants, everything round about the night-time economy, because people, they don't just go to the theatre, they do other things while they're there. So there are all these spin-offs which are not perhaps appearing on the bottom line, but they are important. So I wish you well with the CA to try and get an extra £10 million.
I'm not quite sure we get £10 million. It was raised as an issue. The budget is set now for the next 2 years, but leaders are already saying this fund is not sufficient. So it's incumbent on us to collect the evidence to make sure we have the evidence there to persuade them to put more money into this section of the economy, because there are some authorities that haven't received anything which and they've been identified, and they're going to the top of the agenda. But you're quite right, the deprived areas do miss out in this, and we are looking at how we would engage with them and the minorities. So, yes, it has been raised as an issue. We got a warm welcome. Obviously, the budget is set now, but we've got to have that evidence to make sure we can argue for increased funding, and there were leaders that were making the right noises.
Just final comment from me, if that's okay, but picking up on the point about sport and leisure, which is also part of Cliff's portfolio, we've just put in a bid for 15 million for Greater Manchester, which is called Get GM Moving to Sport England, and we were in this room about 10 days ago arguing for that, and it looks really, really positive. We had the Chief Executive of Sport England here, and apparently she's never been to any of the other areas that made the bid, so fingers crossed we'll get some extra money for that as well.
Unlike Councillor Kate Lewis, my background's in science, particularly physics, not the arts, but everybody, I think, enjoys the arts in different ways, and I can think of 5 organisations here that I benefit from because I go to see them. I don't think I think we should bid a very strong bid for doubling the amount. But I don't think it should mean more to the big ones. It should be more to emerging ones that could be big in the future. I mean, we all love the Halley, and it's internationally known. I wouldn't want to take anything from it, but it's a quarter of the whole budget, and we need more to spread wider.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about my phone going off. I just want to agree with Councillor Morris, because it's very important that we don't just look at who's using it, but more importantly, as far as I'm concerned, in Tameside, who's not using it. I mean, it just came to me. I went to the ballet last night and I got on a very, very crammed tram. On the way back, you couldn't breathe practically, but I was the only person that got off at Ashton-under-Lyne, you know, because by then it was empty. And that sort of says a lot when I say I'm going to the Lowry. People in Tameside don't even know where it is very often, let alone attend it. So I think it's important to look at where we don't go, where the bits we don't reach, and look at what they've got and what they want supporting. I think Councillor Ali knows this, that there are thriving community groups and so on in Tameside, and but they get no funding, extra funding and so on. So I think, as I say, it's all very well looking at the postcode stuff, but I think we've got to look at the postcodes and say who's not getting it.
Thank you. Councillor Grace is fine, by the way. Nobody can say the full name. At a scrutiny committee in Manchester yesterday, we were looking at Manchester's cultural ambition strategy, which isn't a council-owned document. That's produced by the cultural organisations within the city, which sort of seems like an arbitrary boundary, really, in terms of where arts organisations are and who uses them. So just in terms of a strategic approach to funding and kind of achieving our goals of kind of cultural democracy and engagement and that kind of thing, what I'm just wondering, because I'm quite new to the GMCA level, kind of what equivalent there is at GM level in terms of those sort of cooperation, I suppose.
So I wear two hats, or 3 or 4 hats, but one of my hats is working for Manchester City Council on the cultural ambition. The cultural ambition has actually worked quite well, and because it was so well developed with the sector, and that was the sector in Manchester, but also lots of conversations across Greater Manchester with other organisations as well, and certain organisations have kind of signed up to it normally because, I mean, basically the cultural ambition is about cultural democracy, it's about skills, it's about getting the benefit out to everybody. Now, where we are at the GMCA is that we don't have a strategy, and Great Places is kind of our way of building the evidence base to do that strategy, because I think we have information, we kind of understand patterns of usage, we've got some audience data, we're going to be working through Great Places on transport and understanding how people do move about and whether people are coming into Manchester or whether people are going from Tameside to the Octagon, and better understanding those patterns of how people move across and working with Transport for Greater Manchester because one of their key priorities is off-peak travel, and one of the things that the cultural sector can do very well is fill up trams off-peak, you know, and those kind of strategic alignments are the kind of things that we're going to do through Great Places, working with partners so partners being residents, understanding what they want and what they do, and then other kind of strategic partners like NHS providers and skills providers to try and have a much more strategic approach. So again, that's the 2-year ambition that we're currently collecting the research or undertaking the research for, that will then go into, hopefully, an aligned strategy that works for all of the 10. Because one of the things that in consultation that with all of the 10 that we found is each district has its own identity, its own thing that it wants, and for us to come in and say, well, this is what we need, is something broad enough that encompasses everybody's individual ambition, but that helps pick out things, commonalities where actually working across district borders is the best thing for it, I think.
Councillor Lewis.
Not to start any one-upmanship, I have a degree in science as well, so I value them both. But the point I just wanted to ask really was about with these organisations in the portfolio, how much are they expected through their bidding process, funding process, to go out and do work within their communities? We recently had the Roundabout Theatre from the Lowry all the way over Little Hulton, which, you know, it is really incredibly deprived. They very rarely have that sort of experience. It was absolutely fantastic. It was amazing. How much is that sort of opportunity within the funding for the from the GMCA part?
This is where the monitoring of the section, like we take the Halley, I know you said it takes a large amount of the budget, but the idea is that the Halley goes out to every district, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that that happens and monitor that that happens. I know they come to Bolton, probably not as often as we would like them, but they do go out into the districts, and that's what a lot of this is about. And we've got to take on board what you're saying. I know the Octagon goes out into deprived areas in Bolton, but I don't know whether it goes out anywhere, you know, further out. So that's one of the monitoring things that we'd expect the committee to do. And there'll be someone there from every local authority, and they will be telling us what's happening with these organisations, because that is important. But you're quite right, they've got to spread themselves across Greater Manchester. It's not just about Manchester. And I would imagine most of the things in Manchester, most of our local authorities travel in at some time to see what they need to see.
Just a quick point on that. So basically, what we're doing is we are asking people to in the application process to demonstrate their track record. So where have they delivered previously? What communities, so again, geographic or interest, have they delivered with? And then in January, when we've decided who the portfolio is, that's when we'll work on contract negotiations, and that's where we'll get into the real kind of hard outputs that we will expect with this funding, which will be, you will deliver this many sessions, because what we didn't want to do at application stage was to have people make numbers up. We're going to do 30 sessions here, and then never really be held to account. So what we wanted to really understand was what is the impact that these organisations can bring, and then when we get to the contracting stage, that's when, so with a view that by April we'll be fully contracted, the contracting will have that we expect you to deliver them, and that will be what they will be monitored against in the kind of coming years. So there will be an expectation, again in that balancing of the portfolio, that we see delivery as broadly, and also some depth of delivery as well, because I think that's really important. But yeah, it's going to be a contract requirement.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what was the opportunity for the working together and linking up different, similar but different things. So, and I realise I'm going to use an example now, and it's to explain what I'm saying, but it doesn't actually involve these people here. But if we look at Platt, at the costume gallery, and then we have Stockport Hat Works, and although they are different, they are similar, and the potential for actually how we can work together and how we can link in with maybe, you know, we're talking about Transport for Greater Manchester. You can then have a day out and we can do all this across different districts. Now, I use that example because it's kind of come to me, but I'm sure here and even with other organisations that may be able to, maybe wanting to bid for this in the future, is there that ability to kind of do that cross-working?
So as part of Great Places, it kind of feels like, oh, back to Great Places again. So what we've done is we've done a mapping of physical assets, so of all of the kind of cultural organisations, and that isn't just the publicly funded ones, that is the kind of theatre in a particular ward, that's you know, the community group. So we've got that, and we're going to hopefully lay that onto the kind of Greater Manchester mapping, so we can see what the physical assets are and what the groups are. We've also, really interesting, Donna and I were at a meeting with cultural organisations and officers, and we asked people to list the networks that they were part of, and it was phenomenal, the amount of networks, and the networks who might not have been talking to each other even though they were doing the exact same thing across Greater Manchester. So what we are going to do is we're going to do some analysis of those networks and start saying, actually, well, this network is a duplication of that, why don't you work together? Or and we're going to have a kind of directory of organisations, networks, people that you know, and do that kind of information gathering, because we've got it at a kind of district level, and some districts work together really well, and there's been some like GM-wide project stuff, but in terms of having the capacity to have that GM-wide overview, we've not had it yet, so we're building it, hopefully now.
Councillor Bent.
One of the criteria is about meeting responsibility. And I know that you ask all these organisations for how they do it, but in practice, the ones, you know, I've seen and others here, I suspect, very, very small amount addresses the engagement of BME cultures. So I think that really needs to be looked at. I think all these are, when they're making a bid, I think they will magnify how much they do for the BME communities. And I think we have to really, as a scrutiny committee, ask you, how much are you engaging the BME communities?
Absolutely. So in terms of analysis of Section 48 data that we're monitoring, data that we've had back, I have not seen, it might have happened, I have not seen any kind of ethnicity breakdown across the entire portfolio. What we would want to see, and we've put it in as a question that will help us with that balancing, is that people are, they not only say that they work, but they demonstrate how they work. We've asked for evidence, so it's not just kind of numbers, we've asked for qualitative evidence as well, and that will be used in the appraisal process. Me personally, and hopefully, and through Donna and Councillor Morris, we're very, very keen that this fund does help audiences and staff and people engaging with cultural organisations. We want them to reflect the demography of Greater Manchester, and I don't think we're there, but I think that it is a very, very key priority for all of us moving forward with this fund and with all the wider work that we're planning to do as well.
Thank you. It mentions about the organisations wanting a 4-year cycle, but you made a commitment to 2 years. I just wondered a bit more about why that was limited to 2 years, but also is there going to be any impact on those organisations by that limit? I know it's going to continue, but be reviewed. Because we've only identified the funding for 2 years, we will take that point up when we renegotiate and look at the funding. We was only given 2 years funding. That's why the 2 year. And I hope we can, and I think we will, go further than 2 years in the next round when we get to set a new budget.
Can I just jump in there just for clarification? I take the point with the 4-year funding, and you've now got 2 years, which would therefore be out of sync. So with the next lot be another 2 years, you get back into sync again.
No, the next lot we're hoping will be longer because that's what they're asking us to do. That's what they're asking us to do, and we're hoping the next. But at this stage, there's only that much being committed.
Yeah, two I'll restrict myself to 2 things. One is Councillor Morris raised about music service, and Bolton's excellent, and we in our town work together with them and certain other music services. But I think deciding where the Halley musicians come in is a local authority matter that we have the knowledge of which primary schools say are in deprived areas. And that's where we've concentrated Halley musicians in recent years, doing a very good job, whether they may be, well, we learned yesterday about the stats, poor English white lads who don't usually go to music lessons, and there are ethnic minority pupils, Pakistani and so on. So that music service doesn't seem to figure very much in here. I know Manchester has a separate one and doesn't mix with the rest of us much, but I think it'd be interesting for people to know what some of these groups do with particularly primary school children, give me the child to the 7 and all that jazz. But I think the Halley does a very good job. The sort of musicians you see there in the Bridgewater Hall, and the next time you see them, they're in, St Hilda's primary school in Prestwich, working with Congolese, Pakistanis and so on. So, and getting them to go on to the music centre, perhaps on a Saturday morning and things like that. I think music services, I'm sure most of you know about them in your own town, but I think sometime to know about those as Greater Manchester Scrutiny Panel as a whole would be good. Second thing, quickly, I think the timetable just seems to me very ambitious. You say we've only really started the study, the research, there's more to do, we're going out to other boroughs, etc. And yet, I notice they've got to apply now, and they'll hear in a few weeks what they're getting. So that doesn't give much leeway for any new organisation to find out about this and put application in and get it approved, does it? Or am I missing a point? See what
just
yeah.
On the music centre, I can answer that. Bolton runs the hub for the whole of Greater Manchester, so most of the local authorities are involved in that hub. So it does go out to the rest of Greater Manchester, because they are based in Manchester now. All right, and they do operate in all the townships. So they've decided all to come together, and they felt that that's the way we should go
the music
forward.
Service.
The music
including
service, yeah.
Manchester.
Yeah,
oh,
the hub is. So they've all come together. So they're working in collaboration, which is great. But they have for the last couple of years been doing that. The problem is that some of our townships that are not in Greater Manchester wanted to join in now, and we're bothered about it getting too big. But at this stage, the whole it is a hub for the whole of Greater Manchester.
Timetable.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the having it is a very tight timetable, and we recognise that. I think it's one of those things that we started off the process, and I think if we were to do a similar thing again, we would start it much earlier. What we have got is we have got really, really hard deadlines where we have to let people know by January or before January the outcome. So if there are going to be any implications, that they have 90 days notice. So it's absolutely not ideal, but we are working to a very, very tight deadline. In terms of people finding out about it, I've had about 30 phone calls this week with different people from all over, and I'm talking them through, and so we are doing the best that we can. We've got the 3 sessions set up for people to come and talk to us. I am making myself as available as is possible to talk people through, understanding that it's 4 weeks isn't a very long time.
No. Okay, thanks.
The only reason it's like this is because we had to tie it into the election of the mayor for Greater Manchester and then the establishment of Cliff's portfolio. So it all started on the 8th of May, and that's the reason why it's so compressed. Apologies.
There's nothing wrong with being ambitious. Nothing at all.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I love the word ambition, because you can have imagined anything you want and then fill the gaps. In terms of inclusivity and looking at the terrain of equality and diversity, perhaps at some point in our work programme you can present an equality impact assessment. And just to add a few more points, in terms of poverty and deprived areas within combined authorities, I think Councillor alluded, there is this, we often talk about the white backlash and deprived communities where people aren't there and they feel, the big boys are getting the money and, we're left out. So in terms of the engagement programme and going into those areas and actually that culture offering, what is it, we need to be innovative, we need to actually spend money to actually engage these people, and that's one of my bare bones in terms of looking at equalities across the board. So there is a fairness at the end of the day. So that's my question. And also perhaps within our work programme, and you can develop that ambition. Yeah.
On your first point, there's going to be an equality impact assessment of the decisions that are made. So what we've done is we've been kind of very, very mindful of equality and diversity from the start, and so we've included it at every stage where possible in the balancing, and then we are going to do, and we will present, and I think that will go to not just participants but also type of community organisation, so it's not just, so the leadership of different organisations of different makeups is recognised as well. So we're going to do an equality impact assessment of the portfolio, and then going forward, I think we are going to hopefully know more about those communities, and there is going to be a requirement on funded clients. Are we going to call them? Yeah, funded organisations to work with a diversity. But I mean, what we need to understand in the building of the portfolio is who is the most appropriate organisation to work with that particular group of people, because what we don't want is people parachuting all around, having a kind of 2-week relationship and then getting out. Sometimes that's okay and one engagement is brilliant, but we want to understand who's right to have those long-term relationships that really change things over time.
Anything else? I've got a couple of questions actually as well. The first one really is I mean, I understand the Great Place project going forwards, and that takes time, but it's right to give the right amount of time, in my judgment. So in 2 years' time, you'll have a really good picture of what is going to be happening. And not only that, you'll have an evidence base that people are doing what they said they would do to get these grants. I think that must be the way forward. In the short term, the next 2 years, obviously the funding is in place up until 2018. For those 2 years, and you heard around the table, and they're absolutely right, it's difficult to take money away from people, but by the same token, you want to encourage new people coming through. So how are you going to, if you like, balance those two things up? Because I know if I go back, probably be 4 years now, probably, that the the funding suggestion for that particular year, the 3-year period, came to this over in Scrutiny Committee. And there was just like today, wonderful debate, great challenge as to where the money should be spent. And yet I suspect that what happened after that committee meeting, that there's very little change actually. It was probably all again, the big organisations, and some of them are absolutely fantastic. I mean, we are blessed in Manchester, sorry, Greater Manchester, with the cultural offering that we've got. But we do need, to actually, encourage other areas. It's geography, it's in terms of diversity, it's in terms of encouraging, new organisations to come through. So in the short term, how are we going to balance that? And one idea might be that you top slice some of these grants, a small amount of everybody, and use that to encourage perhaps, or to give money, award money to the appropriate organisations who are actually growing, and also, take on board the diversity situation and also the geography. What are your thoughts?
I think in terms of balancing, I'm always very, very wary of top slicing, because I think that you sometimes then just get less good, and I understand the kind of the precarious, but what I think that the conversations that we had through the consultation was that actually this isn't a root and branch review, because we're not there. So it is almost a kind of softer transition where we will make smaller changes, but there is the expectation that there will be some change based on the kind of applications that come in. I think what we need to do is that's where the balancing becomes really, really important, and we need a variety of scale, size, delivery, art form. We will do the best that we can. I think I was quite open in the consultations and I said there is no situation where we're going to make everybody happy. There is always going to be somebody, and we will try to do the very best that we can, I think.
Just going from there, I mean, the other interesting figure in the report is the amount of money that comes from the Arts Council in Greater Manchester, which is, I mean, I never realised it was so much, £140 million. And of course, I know you shouldn't necessarily penalise somebody because they're so good at, say, the Halle. But that should be informing as well, where you're spending the money, or where you're granting the money, I should say. And it would be interesting to see, if you like, side by side, what is happening in the comparison between the arts funding and the funding we're doing from Greater Manchester, because you want a few other organisations coming through. I think the message you've got loudly and clearly really is it's important that we actually do the best we can. I'm sure you will do the best you can, and it won't be easy the first 2 years, but at least you've got a plan in place for doing it on a proper basis in 2 years. And to me, the most important thing of all is making sure that whatever people claim that they're doing in terms of getting these grants, that they actually deliver. And that is the thing that I've taken from this report more than anything else, actually. So I interrupted, sorry.
It's fine. Just to add to Marie-Claire talking about, she will deliver because she's brilliant. And we only have her 2 days a week. This is the cultural resource that we have, is someone working 2 days a week. So if you compare that to people working on economic development in John's area, or transport or housing, and it is the single reason that people want to live here, the single most important reason. But I think we're under no pretence, and we don't want the committee today to feel that this money will fund every bit of cultural activity in Greater Manchester. We've not a cat in hell's chance. We don't get anything in Wigan, do we, Charles, from Section 48, and never have had. But we expect our residents to travel around and move around and take advantage of other things. We put 9 million into culture in Wigan as a council, and I know Manchester do, much more than that into your culture, not just reliant on this money. So I think we've got to think about all of the resource, not just Arts Council and this money. It's about the funding and the prioritisation of this. Our young people, if they are to go into a cultural apprenticeship in the future, that's the second biggest growth area for apprenticeships. So, let's think about, and we've got some brilliant initiatives in the pipeline, like Factory and others, that are going to really boost us even further. So apologies we've not been everywhere. We did go to Wigan and we don't get anything. So, but thank you very much.
The way forward now, you'll obviously decide where the grants will go to, and on I'm sure a robust process. Will that report then come back here before it's actually finalised? Is that feasible within the timescale, I think?
I'd have to look at timings, I think.
Yeah.
So in my mind,
Yeah.
I think decisions go to the CA, or decisions will be made by the CA on the 15th of December. Is there a meeting on the 15th of December? No. No?
It's not until January.
No. Is there,
November
there's,
and then January.
so there's no meeting in December? No. Okay. Well, I'll have to look at my timescales then.
I'm sure members would like to see, before it's written in tablets of stone,
Yeah.
that you have taken on board all these excellent ideas from members of this committee. And I think that's important, actually. And whilst at the end of the day we accept it's an executive decision, it's important that we actually, I think, get an understanding of that and try and influence it as best we can do in a fair way.
We'll definitely come back. And also your brilliant, what was the Statutory Functions Committee, very old-fashioned and municipal, is going to be retained. Cliff's met with representatives from that group, who you all have representatives on that group, and they're doing a fantastic job.
They're doing the monitoring.
They're really, really brilliant.
Because we do feel that's important. Yes,
So, thank you for your presentation. I'll let it run on, actually. I mean, we've had lots and lots of questions. I think in some ways a bit too many, perhaps. But it's such an important engagement area, and I think it's. I thank you all for your contributions. Right, so we've now got the implementation plan. Right. So, it's John Holden, yep. So, do you want to talk to the plan?
I will do. Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, just to offer apologies from the Mayor and Eamon Boylan. Unfortunately, we both had long-standing commitments, which meant they weren't able to be here today, but they both have it in their this meeting in their diary for next month and are committed to come to that meeting. So members will recall that at the last meeting we had a paper on the refreshed Greater Manchester strategy and the 2016-17 performance report, and that set out that we were in the process of developing a comprehensive implementation plan for the strategy. That implementation plan is now done in draft, and we've brought it here today for your comment. Just for information, it hasn't been to the Combined Authority yet for approval, so it's different to the previous paper where we are looking for input to inform the decision that the Combined Authority makes at the end of this month. So just to talk you through the plan in a little bit to sort of give you some orientation. So the plan itself is structured under each of the 10 priorities and the 5 enablers. Under each priority area, there's a set of ambition statements set out, and what they do is distill the essence of the Greater Manchester strategy down into some bite-sized chunks. We've then broken the actions down into some themes or groups which sort of lump similar actions together, and then the actions are shown alongside a lead organisation and a portfolio lead. Just to stress that the lead organisation is the organisation that's responsible for the coordination of that action, not necessarily the delivery. And you'll see there's a lot of Greater Manchester Combined Authorities in there, and that's not the people who are sat in this building here. That's Greater Manchester Combined Authority in its broadest sense, so including the actions of districts as well. And it's really important to stress that the Greater Manchester strategy cannot be delivered unless the districts all contribute to that. The plan itself has been brought together, drawing inputs from the 10 local authorities, from the local enterprise partnership, from the health and social care partnership, and other sort of GM agencies such as Transport for the North, and I think really importantly from the GM Centre for Voluntary Organisation as well, recognising the much closer working relationship the CA and LEP now have with the community and voluntary organisations. Because of the integrated nature of the Greater Manchester strategy, the priorities don't easily fall into scrutiny pools. That's a deliberate thing because we think making those links between policy areas is so important, and it's important that through our strategy we don't sort of recreate silos in the way that central government does, but just slightly different ones locally. There's 3 key priorities, I think, which fall under the remit of this scrutiny pool. Priority 2, which is young people equipped for life, particularly at the upper end of that in the transition towards work. Priority 3, which is around good jobs and allowing people to progress in work. And priority 4, which is a thriving and productive economy. For those of you who are quite sharp-sighted, you'll see there's a deliberate mistake in the reporting, but we've actually given you reactions for priority 1. That is an error, but obviously the detailed actions are in the annex. I'd say it's a deliberate mistake because actually the strategy says how important early years is for everybody, and there is an important contribution that the actions of this committee will be interested in play in supporting school readiness. So I won't go through the actions in detail, but the paper notes some of the priority actions which have been highlighted by policy leads, as well as the actions which link to the discussion that we had at the meeting last time. Happy to open it up to questions, I suppose, particularly comments ahead of the combined authority about changes you'd like to make or issues you'd like to raise with the combined authority. Any actions that you would like to see more detail come back on at future meetings, and then just to get your agreement that we would come back in 6 months' time with an updated plan, as well as the first performance management dashboard, which will set out how we're doing in implementing these actions.
Before I throw it out to the committee, in terms of KPIs, they're not actually noted in here yet. Presumably you're working those up at the moment, are you?
We are, yeah. We are still in discussions with partner organisations about what are the appropriate KPIs. The intention is that those discussions will be concluded in time to be able to inform the first performance management dashboard, and then information will be presented and made publicly available.
Whatever I would suggest is that when you worked up your KPIs, you bring the KPIs to this committee for us to influence that as well before they're written in tablets of stone and go forward in terms of your performance reporting.
Yes, I'm very happy to do that. We can bring forward the performance dashboard elements, so you'll see that in draft before you then see the first full version.
That's good.
Thank you very much. John, I'm going to raise some issues actually on the areas, priority area 4, but also a work and economic matter that comes up on priority area 5 and then even priority area 10 actually. I do hope they're useful. So I'll just have to whiz to my, through my papers, sorry, forgive me. So when we start on priority 4, ambitions, I'd be grateful if, as well as attracting new businesses is the wording, whether there would be attention to what I call supporting current businesses. I just didn't want to miss that. You know, sometimes the language used can be quite important. The other thing I wanted to say is that I noticed that there is quite a lot of detail on the health areas of this priority. I think they get about 4 pages. So I hope you don't mind me saying I would support you being able to put more words if you wanted to. For example, where it says develop business scale-up ambition for GM, I'd be very happy for that to say even more about what that actually would involve in terms of innovation, export, leadership and management support. And similarly, when you go down to GM will become a top 20 global city by 2035, it refers to the 8 priorities. I'd be very happy to see those 8 priorities listed there. I think it would be forgive me. I think it would be highly agreeable if there is additional wording in this section. My view is that this section is a crucially important section. Turning over the page, on this second page, it starts, of course, at the top of the page. I think we're all following on. The page starts with GM is recognised as top 5 European digital city region. If we just go across to the next column where it mentions strategy and it says a submission into the autumn statement, I thought, yes, of course. In fact, I'd be grateful if consideration would actually mean that Greater Manchester and devolution and the finance and the great progress that's going on here would in fact get properly mentioned in the autumn statement. That might be a political request for the Mayor. It would be good when we all listen to that autumn statement in November. If anything comes up about Greater Manchester and the Greater Manchester economy, I think we'd all welcome that. Just going down about halfway, where we then start to talk about industry, business, manufacturing, where we talk about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and the identification of new sites. That's what stood out to me. I would be grateful to hear, my view on this is that some areas, of course, are perhaps identified for logistics industries. And I've read, of course, that if there's one area where wages look like they're very probably going to grow, when you look at things like the tracking systems that even the Bank of England uses, you know, all the data that's there, a fair bit's been said that there is an expectation that manufacturing will see wage rises. And so I would be grateful if when you look at new sites, manufacturing were seriously considered, because for areas of the 10 where we worry all the time about our average job pay, then you won't be surprised to hear that I'm keen to see more industry attracted to our area that pays the higher wages. And yes, I recognise that we would have to make sure that we've got people with the appropriate skills to take those jobs up. I just wanted to identify that, because there is a fair bit of manufacturing allocation and logistics allocation in the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Further down, we will have the right employment sites, it says, and premises in the right locations to support economic growth in all parts of Greater Manchester. And again, there's more information there on infrastructure. And I'm keen to know, it's a question, you might want to give me an answer. I'm sorry, I'm raising quite a few issues today. I am really keen to know how the 10 councils do have a voice in that themselves. Thank you. I think the other matters probably I won't need to speak in as much detail to them. If we do go to priority area 5, and it's actually on page 2, and it was raised at our last meeting, so I hope you don't mind me raising this, and it says that Greater Manchester wants to influence the creation of a new UK aviation strategy. What I'd like to see in there, because I fully supported this when it was raised last time, and the sentence I've come up with is an improved business passenger airport experience. I think a number of us were quite keen to push that forward, and terminals 1 and 3 were cited, and we can see why, because that's about business investment into Greater Manchester. It's not just Manchester, it's Greater Manchester. And I think I've got to go to the other section to get to section 10. Priority 10, I should say. We get to priority 10, and this is called an age-friendly Greater Manchester. And there are some what I call economic parts to it. Well, actually, just the tail end of it is possibly what I call the economic part to it, because it's about work. So it did stand out to me, and it talks about integrate age-friendly employment into the Greater Manchester Employment Charter. But in here it does talk about, that's right, economic participation in the over 50s. What I want to say about this is, I just want this part of the priorities to be right, and certainly the language to be right, because I don't find that I ever use the word older people when I'm talking about a 50-year-old or a 52-year-old, or even a 56-year-old. I definitely think about middle-aged. I'm 50, gosh. So I'm getting into this category, aren't I? And, but it's not just bias on my part. I genuinely, even before I was 50, you know, and I genuinely don't see these ages as what I call older people. But I think they're massively important when it comes to workforce statistics and what's happening. And the reason why it struck me was, I've been looking at the Department for Work and Pensions figures, because we have to use them. And in Bolton, categories, for example, we look at 16 to 25, we're interested in that age category. Then we're interested in the over 55s, or the 55 and over, so that would be 55 to 65. And the reason why is, on our unemployment statistics, we've got about 25% of the unemployed are 55 and above, and no doubt a good component of that statistic, I'm afraid, is people who are having sickness benefits and so on, not just unemployment benefits. And yes, then there is that chunk in the middle that's never to be dismissed, because from age 26 to 55, we must have 12,000 people on unemployment benefit of some kind in Bolton. But because I've got to look at that 55 group and over, because it is important if we've got 25% of our unemployment statistics, it just occurred to me, can we make whatever statistics we're using from, say, 50 upwards, that economic-wise, and what we look at here economy-wise, we need to make sure it fits in with what we look at, because we really care about these things, and we do care about people, certainly, who are over 55, people in their 60s and 70s who want to work. We care very much about that agenda, and allowing people and for people being able to work, and for businesses and organisations to work well with people in different age groups. So that's why I wanted to raise it today, just so that the age categories and the correct language is used when we're referring to these matters, so that we're not offending anybody. Thank you.
There's not due to the plugs there, so I mean, I don't know how you can answer all of them now, or if you want to respond to some of them.
Should I respond to both, but I'm able to. I mean, I guess one thing to say is that the plan does bring together lots of different actions from different parts of the system, so I'm not an expert on every single aspect of every single one, but I'll do my best. So yeah, noted about the suggestion to change some of the language around the ambitions, and I'll feed back in. You did rightly flag, but there's a lot of detail around health. Partly that's because different parts of Greater Manchester's policy areas are in different cycles, so parts of the cycle of their policy development work. So there's actually been a huge amount of work done around the health agenda and the development of local plans. So we've just reflected that in, and we took a decision to, where we've got detail, to put it in the plan, even if it was slightly unbalanced. And that's part of the reason why we just put forward a 6-month plan, because that allows some of the other areas to catch up, to allow us to show a consistent level of detail across the piece. Although you are quite right, with things like the internationalisation strategy, we can add more detail, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. On the submission to the autumn statement, the Combined Authority submitted an input to the autumn budget, as it's now called, about 6 weeks ago to meet government's deadline. We had our first meeting with Treasury officials earlier this week, which was positive, and they've asked to set up a number of working groups to look at those specific areas up until the end of this month, with a view to those influencing what's in the national budget. I'd suggest that we'd want to bring back an update on where we get to with those discussions to the next meeting of this group. On the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, there's a process underway as part of that to identify the sites in Greater Manchester that we'll put forward as new allocations in the spatial framework for industry and warehousing land. In planning terms, those land designations are the same. So if a land's identified as being suitable for warehousing, you can put industrial sites on it. I think there is a recognition, as we undertake the fundamental rewrite, that actually there is a big difference between industry and warehousing, manufacturing and warehousing activity, and on balance we want to be getting more of the high value, high quality manufacturing jobs, and ensuring we've got the broader policies in place to allow us to do that. And that's not to diminish the importance of some of those logistics jobs, which we have a potential to collect as well. Noted the suggested wording on the aviation strategy, and I will feed that in. And then finally, on the age-friendly Greater Manchester work, that section takes its language from the work that's been developed by the Greater Manchester Ageing Hub, and that's a partnership of local authorities with representatives from old people's organisations themselves, academics, and sort of leaders in that sector. And I recognise there's quite a lot of sensitivity around the language that's used and ways it's put forward. there is a recognition of the the huge difference between somebody who's 90 and somebody who's 50, and that actually there's no such thing as a sort of single older person. I'll feed that back to the team then and ask them to have a look at that again.
How about those answers?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, I know John opened up with apologies on behalf of the Mayor and the Chief Executive. But I have to say, I think it is disappointing that neither of them are here for what is a significant piece of work, an important report, which comes forward in their name. I guess John may have written most of it, but the report is in the Mayor's name and that of the Chief Executive. And I appreciate they have long-standing commitments. We did actually have some emails circulating about our schedule of meetings, so to be asked in advance some time ago now about dates that we were all available, and then find at our first proper business meeting one of only 2 substantive reports on the agenda that they can't be here for. And I don't think it's too churlish just to say it's a bit disappointing, and I hope we can avoid that in future. Personally, I'd almost rather have not had the report than have the report, with all due respect to John, who I'm sure can answer all of our questions, but, without the Mayor or the Chief Executive here. So accountability is a theme that runs throughout, and I was kind of struck by the irony, so I'll just leave that at that. Other comments...
Can I just jump in there, actually? I mean, you make a very valid point. And to be fair, when we had the interim Mayor and previous Chief Executive, they came to nearly all the meetings that they were when it was relevant. So whatever word we use, I mean, let's give them the benefit of the doubt this time round. But I think in future meetings, where appropriate, they need to be here. And it's not beyond the wit of man to actually get the timetable sort of sorted out so they can put things in their diary well in advance.
Not beyond the wit of man or woman, Chair. So I wanted to make a couple more comments. Firstly, about the Northern Powerhouse, and I guess this is more relevant to wait until the Mayor and Chief Executive are here. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the room that rather doubts the long-term commitment that the current government, central government, has towards the Northern Powerhouse. And I'd be very interested, again with due respect to John, to hear directly from the Chief Exec or the Mayor. The Prime Minister herself was in town yesterday. I know he was meeting with her. But I'd be very interested to have an update on how they see the commitment to the Northern Powerhouse, because it seems to me we are, and again it's referred directly in this report several times, I think we're placing a lot of emphasis on there, which I hope is not mistaken emphasis, because I think there is reason to have some concerns, shall we say, about longer term commitment to it. So that won't say any more on that for now. Manchester Airport is mentioned in, it was already referred to by Councillor Howarth. We did say at the last meeting, she'd indicated that perhaps at some stage that might be a job of work, a task and finish thing that we might do, or at least have a report looking at it as an economic driver for the region. And of course, since then, we've had the very bad news about Monarch. And I guess that's impacted quite significantly on Manchester. There are quite big players there. I don't know, but so again, it would be useful at some point if that report, which we talked about before, that piece of work might be progressed now with perhaps a little more urgency than the one of the committee, knowing that there are some bigger issues than perhaps even we thought when we first discussed it last time around. And secondly, lastly, just to make the point about GMSF, I know it's covered in here, it has been mentioned already, but again, I don't think I'm probably the only person around the table that still has major misgivings about the way GMSF is going, particularly the fact that it looks on the face of it as if some parts of the Greater Manchester conurbation are being targeted rather more than others. You might say for obvious reasons, but nonetheless, you know, to coin a phrase, if we are all in this together, then it's important that one or two places are not seen to do all the heavy lifting on that. And I just think this is a subject of a debate in its own right. I won't take up committee's time this afternoon on it, but just to flag up that certainly a number of us, I think, do have concerns about that as well. Thanks.
I was making a quick note, so I'm not just copying Councillor Hunter, but I do agree with what he said. My question, if Mr Burnham had been here, would be where we're up to. GMSF. I spent months, like many others, defending the proposals and getting in the neck from my residents, but that often happens, and going to meetings and consultations, because I realised we need more housing in our area and we need more employment and so on. Then it was all withdrawn when the new mayor came, and I looked stupid, quite frankly, but again, that's not unusual. But nothing seems to have happened as yet. I think it does affect us. Employment areas affect this committee. Recreational areas. Among the acres for housing was partially in my ward, partly in another, a civic park where we have horse riding, fishing, walking, and so on. And that was down for housing. Now, the officers told me, oh, it won't happen there, but it's down on the plan, coloured in yellow and so on. So the public are still on at me about it. And I'm just wondering where we're up to with the GMSF revised plan by the mayor. Is there any timetable for production of it? Because people do keep asking us, don't they? Thank you.
June next year.
Yeah.
After the elections.
Jump in there as well. I think one of the things we need to be conscious of, the spatial framework is a good example. That could be considered by 2 committees or even 3 committees. So I think one of the things, whilst I understand what John was saying in terms of the way in which all this has been cut, that almost on purpose, it's not been, if you like, compartmentalised. We do need to understand as committees, who has taken main responsibility for certain areas, and that's the best example of the law, actually. Because I'm sure that all of us have got an input onto the special framework, but we don't want to be doing work, duplicating work that other committees are doing if they've got prime responsibility. So one of the things I think that we need to do, a suggestion of mine would be that, I mean, I've come across this situation before, in Rochdale, where we also had 3 overview scrutiny committees, and probably what we need to do, not too far into the future, probably about December or January time, is to get perhaps a meeting of the 3 chairs and ideally the 3 deputy chairs or vice chairs of the committee, so we can actually get a framework together which needs to be approved by each individual overview scrutiny committee, so we can actually identify who is taking prime responsibility for these things. And it may be on some areas we have joint meetings, but I just think it's the way in which all this is being cut at the moment. You run the risk of duplicating things, but you also run the risk, even more importantly, of things falling between the cracks. And I just think that's an important thing that we actually need to do going forward. So can we put that down as an action plan, action point for myself to discuss with the other 3 chairs, what way forward we can do on this, actually, if you're happy with doing that.
Yes, also, I understand the committee's concerns about, keeping up to date with what's going on with the GMSF. The Housing Planning and Environment Committee have actually asked for a note, a kind of short briefing note to go to every meeting where there's not a substantive item on the agenda. If it would be helpful, obviously we could circulate both the minutes and the link to the papers. Rather than clogging up your email boxes, we could circulate the links to the papers because obviously we're really keen that, the committees work effectively together and you divide up the overlapping bits of the programme between you, or get together where it makes sense, either in task and finish or in joint meetings. So really happy to implement that if that would be helpful to the committee.
Again, going on from there may be, in terms of the task and finish groups, we do joint ones. There are many areas, again, which cross over between, if you like, the economy and other facets of things.
Can I just answer the specific question on the timeline for the spatial framework, because that has now been announced, and there's a timeline on the Combined Authorities website, and I think we can send the link to that and the paper that informed it. The plan now is to work towards publication in June of next year, and that was the agreed timeline which leaders came to.
I've got some clarity about the GMSF. I often ask about the time framework. Eamon Boylan did come to a resource and governance scrutiny yesterday, and a question was placed to. Yeah, so in terms of clarity on the three committees, the housing, environment, corporate issues, and us.
Just actually speak up.
Oh, can you not hear me? I do apologise. Right, in terms of clarity for the three committees, you said you're going to meet and share some of the ideas, so ensuring some healthy overlap could happen, but at the same time we need to be aware of what they're dealing with and what we're dealing with. So in that kind of it's about direct communication with them. So why not share our work program with their, and vice versa, so we know what's in them. And as you said, so in terms of should there be a work group looking at issues, if members of this group is interested, may possibly join, as has been suggested. Yeah. So that was on the area of work program and overlap. My issues is on the priorities and ambitions. It's on page. Is on priority number 2, and it's on the first page of that, and it's about careers and hidden young people. It's about hidden young people. Could I have some clarity in terms of who are they, and also in terms of the lead agency, will they have the appropriate resources in terms of dealing with the hidden people, and I suppose that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. The term hidden people comes from a report that the Greater Manchester Centre for Voluntary Organisation did as part of their Talent Match programme. So they've been working with young people across Greater Manchester who are unemployed and not currently receiving any form of support, either from the job centre or a college or another sort of organisation in Greater Manchester. And they did some work which analysed Greater Manchester's young population and came up with a large number of people who are not in work or not in education or training and are not receiving any support at all. And that's been seen as a big challenge for us. So that's why the reference to hidden people is in that work. There is in parallel to the work to build the implementation plan, we are looking at the resources required to deliver the Greater Manchester strategy as part of a process to set a 2-year budget for the combined authority starting next financial year. I think there are big challenges across the piece actually about whether the actions in the implementation plan are sufficient to be able to deliver the ambitions that's set out in the Greater Manchester strategy. I think that's it's a key part of my role over the next 6 months is to understand if that is the case, and where it isn't, to start to put in plans resources to be able to fully deliver the Greater Manchester strategy.
Just a quick one, Chair. Thank you very much. I mean, so they're neat people. You're referring to employment, education, not.
That's right. There's a lot of overlap with neat.
Perhaps you can use that analogy. Right. In terms of resources, would this organisation has to be trained to deal with young people of that nature? Because you're talking about capacity of an organisation. So are we going to capacitate them?
So the lead organisation is not necessarily the organisation that's going to lead the delivery of that action. So there's a there's already a significant amount of activity across Greater Manchester targeted towards neat young people. There's questions about how effective some of that is, how well joined up it is. The lead organisation there has a responsibility to be able to look at that and try to bring together the activity that already exists, and then to understand, well, even if we bring together all that activity, if there is still a gap in that, to be able to identify that resource requirement and then to seek additional resources to fill that. I think there isn't a huge pot of money at a Greater Manchester level to put towards delivering those actions. What we need to look at is how we can galvanise the capacity that's already in the system to be able to deliver against that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, with regard to priorities for this committee, and I'm sorry to go back to it, but you hinted at priority 1 being in this report by mistake. Now, it's my belief that priority 1 and priority 2 are intrinsically linked, because with 32% of our children not being ready for school, they are typically not going to be equipped for life at the end of their school journey. So I would like it noted, and would like some work on both priorities for this committee.
Hi, just to hopefully allay your fears a little bit, there was a work programme, an informal work programming of the Corporate Issues and Reform Scrutiny Committee, and they were very, very keen to set up a real focus on priority 1. That's not to deny this committee a right to, sort of review that priority at all, but I do think that committee thoroughly recognises the fundamental nature and importance of that priority. And so possibly if we just do a little bit of a watch and see, and if I can keep you updated on that work, if that would be helpful, and through works with the chair. Yeah.
As councillors, when we're first appointed, we feel our role is to bat for our ward. And then you get involved in council committees where you're batting for the whole of the borough. And then you come to committees like this, we are batting for Greater Manchester. And in terms of, sorry, when I first put my hand up, it was on the spatial framework. In terms of the spatial framework, I think it was a triumph of the people involved over a number of years that they started thinking of Greater Manchester and how we can bring up all the residents of Greater Manchester, because if you just develop some areas and neglect the others, it's never going to happen. We're never going to be that big hub that we want to be. So some of the people who weren't involved, I think, are still feeling that they've got to bat for their area. And some of these, Councillor Hunter was saying, the development is in certain areas. Well, all those people together from Greater Manchester identified that that's where it is possible to locate extra businesses, where there is space, where there is need, to bring up the whole of Greater Manchester. And the people who are involved, I think it's, to some extent, some people are trying to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And, we don't want to see that happen. So I'm pleased it's more or less in its original state, because we need to look at the whole to bring up the whole.
I agree with that, but more fundamental in a way. I mean, it is Greater Manchester. I mean, a lot of people don't work in the place where they live. And I'm not just thinking about commuting into the centre of Manchester, for all the professional services firms and retailing and everything else. But all over the place, people move around. So it's got to be right that you look at things from a Manchester perspective. And I'm completely signed up to that, even though I know my party, one political point, we won't ever have the Mayor of Greater Manchester, for the foreseeable future. Not bothered about that. It's the right thing to do. John, anything else on that?
Can I just come back and clarify what I said? I think it was somewhat misrepresented. I was involved in the AGMA leaders group 15 years ago, so I'm well used to working across the conurbation, but I just don't accept, I think, one of your central points, which is that this is the areas that are being looked at for development are as a consequence of what people across the region have said. They're not. They're a consequence of what developers and landowners have said, and that's a fundamentally very different thing.
No, I don't think there's any questions there.
Any more questions? I got one question, actually. I mean, if you look at these detailed objectives or
ambitions. Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Unsurprisingly, we've had that discussion quite a lot with both leaders and the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership. Just to be clear about the actions that are in there are actions which are in the main already ongoing. There is an argument that there's too much going on and we should stop some of that, and I think that's a role for groups like this to be able to bring those points forward. What we've done in the existing plan to try and draw out some of the priorities is highlight some in blue. I think that probably doesn't go far enough. As we develop the 2-year plan, what we're trying to do is that more detailed work in the background on resources and prioritisation, so that we can move towards a 2-year plan where we can stand behind it confidently as Greater Manchester and say this implementation plan is going to deliver this strategy. And I think this is implementation plan is a bridge towards the one that we're going to bring forward early next financial year.
Very helpful. I think that's what I think the committee would welcome us seeing that, to see how we can influence what the priorities are going forwards, because as I say, better to deliver what you can deliver than have such enormous aspirations that you end up doing nothing, and that is always the risk factor in something like this. And there's some brilliant ideas in there. And there are some others absolutely essential things to do. One of the things we were talking about before, talking about jobs and skills and so on, we've banged on about this as an overview scrutiny committee for a while, and that is the lack of careers advice in schools. And there's nothing in this document specifically on that. So I think things like that is what we, as a committee, can possibly influence and try and develop with you as a help to the executive.
Yeah.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you.
Very shortly, Chair. Thank you very much. I know it's a very late afternoon. Just on that point, in terms of monitoring and in terms of outcomes, so we've got ambitious, there's fantastic things in there, but it's about how do we measure it and where's the outcome. I'll stop there, but it's about prioritising and then saying this is what's happened. It's CA-wide. We're doing monitoring CA-wide, so we need some kind of outcome-based performances, and that's the presentation and the style in which you present it.
I was saying before that we need, if you like, the KPIs to come to this committee before they're written in tablets of stone, so we can again influence that, which we've agreed on that clearly before the next performance monitoring report comes out. So I think we're on the same song sheet.
Thank you, Chairman. I will confess that I did think about the level of ambition when I read the paperwork, and I thought about it. And then I thought about people I'd met, officers that I'd met, organisations like New Economy, what I knew about the science and the development going on in this city region across the authorities. And I came to the conclusion, actually, that I was really quite impressed. And I thought, do you know what? No, this is what I want. I do want it to be like this. I do think it's the right words, it's the right ambition for Greater Manchester. When the public read aspects of this, I hope they too are proud. And it absolutely felt right for the 21st century that we, really want to progress these areas that are set out quite clearly here. Again, I go back to that digital summit and the positivity around that. The positivity around business, the positivity around science, the positivity around higher education, and the positivity, I think, that is growing slowly, that we can actually start to transform lives, particularly those where there's been intergenerational poverty, where there's a lack of school readiness. I think there's an appetite to really start to carve out and get leaders across the sectors. I'm not just saying political. Get people here in Greater Manchester. I think devolution has been part of that drive for ambition. I think it's what's freeing up energy in people to think we really want to achieve for people now, because perhaps people have felt held back being able to achieve because the country has felt so London parliamentary focused and dominated. And my sense is that devolution must be part of this ambition, and why people. And I hope it's for the people that struggle with hardship that we can deliver the most from these ambitions.
Let me add to that. I couldn't have summarised that better, actually. That's my attitude as well, actually. And to use the famous phrase of the ex-president of the United States of America, yes, we can.
Could I just do a little bit of promotion activity while I'm here? We talked about the importance of school readiness and how that's a shared priority for us all. Next Friday is the Greater Manchester School Readiness Summit, which is taking place. Tickets are still available, so if you want to come along to that, there is a really good mix of sort of local Greater Manchester speakers and national speakers at that. I think that'll be hugely important in setting the agenda for that programme. The Greater Manchester strategy itself is going to be launched after the Combined Authority on the 27th of October. You'll be getting an invitation to that event early next week, so just to watch out for that one to land in your inbox. So the Ageing Hub is up and running. It's up until now been working on its strategy. That's coming towards the head. We have already started doing some promotional campaigns. So we did one probably a couple of weeks ago now, which was about raising awareness of older people having sex, and that was, I think, it's got quite a lot of coverage nationally. It's an important issue, and arguably a positive story about ageing. So it seems. We can circulate details of that to members, but it does seem that bringing back a paper on the Ageing Hub might be a sensible thing, particularly around some of those economic aspects that it has.
That's right. So what we've got then, you're going to bring the KPIs back to us, suggested KPIs imminently before the plan is finalised. You're going to prioritise what's within, if you like, the current plan, but we're not to get rid of the aspirations that are in the plan, but just put them in order, perhaps. We'll get some information on a regular basis on this special framework, and we'll address the issue of, if you like, ageing, and I'm in that category as well. And I think the other thing we need to do is to consider what task and finish groups that we need. And I think the thing we said before is it is about sharing agendas and sharing minutes and plans so that we work on a coordinated basis amongst the three scrutiny committees. Thank you for your report. Have I missed anything, by the way? No? Sorry?
No, you're not.
We won't go into that.
Nobody's older than me.
Right. Right, so next thing on the agenda, what we need to do with this, useful document, right, that's fine. Yeah. work
Okay,
programme.
it's just the work programme.
Yep.
I'm sorry I haven't been able to make as much progress on this as I'd like to, so I'd welcome your your support and assistance in being quite directive of me. It would be really helpful if I just leave it at that. I do have a couple of suggestions listening to the conversation as we've been going through. There is an item on digital infrastructure that was anticipated to go to the Combined Authority in October, but it will be now going in November, we think. And I think it would be really helpful to have the committee's input on that. Yep. And, you know, possibly also draw out some stuff from the Digital Summit, you know, some of the action plans from the Digital Summit. But I don't know whether, you know, this is my suggestions, and obviously it's at the gift of the committee to say, no, we definitely don't want to do that. John mentioned something possibly on an update to do with the discussions with Treasury and, you know, whether or not that we would be able to get you to ensure that the information would be current, whether we could get, it might be a verbal update. And I very much hear your comment about getting the most senior officers in this room. You know, that has been heard loud and clear, and I will be going back to colleagues to ensure they understand that message very, very well. I don't know whether if there's another particular item. You have consistently referred to employment land, and I did wonder whether or not employment land, that particular aspect of the GMSF, and you know, sort of look at that might be an issue.
Yeah, I think so. Can I just say, Jane, quickly?
Yeah, sure.
If we're allowed to know about these land areas for employment, we've got a big one on the edge of Rochdale and Berries, for instance, massive one, which I'm not again, but I'm just saying, are we allowed to know about these ideas before June next year, when we'll find the whole thing goes out to consultation again? Do we have any input or not?
I think what's important is the detailed process. And you make a very fair point, and it's that area land is absolutely enormous, and it's got major ramifications of what happens there. So I think we need to understand the process as well as, if you like,
what we're allowed to know.
Updated briefings. Councillor Ali.
Just a quick one, Chair.
Yeah.
Chair, CA-wide skills audit. Because jobs and skills relate. So is there a scope in terms of getting that terrain known with CA-wide?
So are you referring to the skills of the people working for the Combined Authority and how they're matched to the tasks, or the skills of the population of Greater Manchester and how they match jobs?
The latter.
Oh, right, okay. The first one would be an interesting piece as well.
First one would be very interesting.
It would be very interesting to know, you know, who's who there, and also look at the quality impact in terms of the employment within the Combined Authority structure. That would be a good thing for us to look at and monitor. Indeed, you just raised it. Yes, have it. But my idea was Combined Authority-wide, you know, where there is gaps, skills scoping and jobs, and is there any? Because sometimes what happens, we often say, for example, in Tameside, there's a low skill in terms of, you know, the pay as well. So you can compare who's getting what in terms of payments. Sometimes some local authorities are within a deprived conurbation. The pay, the wage is far, far lower than somebody perhaps working in the city.
Strike me that the whole area of skills and skills gaps is so important. It's probably a good thing to do for a task and finish group, frankly, because you know, at the end of the day, you know, if we've got aspirations for these high-tech jobs, the building of our science base, healthcare base, you need the right skills in place, and over the longer term, you need the right educational pathways. You also need to consider whether or not what happens if you haven't got them, and therefore. You need more immigration from that perspective. And the other thing, of course, at the end of the day, is also working with universities in terms of what they're doing to promote the right skills, etc. So people will stay in this area. One of the biggest risks I think that Manchester's got is that, luckily my three children all live in Greater Manchester, but so many of our friends who've got kids who've got degrees in, let's say, science, whatever, where do they go to? They go off to London. So things that we have to do, actually, to make sure that Greater Manchester is an attractive place to not just to work, but to live as well. And we talked today about the cultural offer. That is part of it.
One of the things, you've got continuous, every page, Brexit monitor. I think that's also an area of work that we need to know in terms of how many projects in the Greater Manchester is actually funded by EU, and that's absolutely right in terms of work programme. We need to know what's going on in that area of European funding, our projects, what they are, and the effect of it. If they're going to be terminated, or if they're going to be, the government's going to put the backup with them. So the Graffin Centre is provided European money, isn't it? So in terms of staffing, in terms of what's happening in that area of European finance for our projects.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Howard.
Chairman, I'd be grateful if we could invite the right officers, and I certainly would like it to include officers of New Economy, to talk to what I find a difficult matter. It seems like it's a difficult matter, which is that when I've looked at the predictions for jobs growth, it does seem to be around, certainly NVQ4, some 3, I mean this is how it's classified, and higher education jobs. That's what I've seen when I've had a look at the published data, and yet it does appear, forgive me, I don't know the landscape of Greater Manchester fully across the 10 enough, but if I just take, well, if I take Manchester, if I take Bolton, if I take some of the north like Rochdale and Oldham, we've got, if I call it big pockets, or we've got fairly sizable, that's a better word, groups of people with no skills, because again it's back to the classifications, with no skills or low skills. And so I hope you don't mind me saying, I want somebody to, as hard as it might be, I want somebody to talk to that subject, no matter how hard the answers are going to be. Perhaps we would want to scrutinise it, because if you tell us actually that is the state of play, then I feel that I should at least fully understand that, so I can ask the appropriate pertinent questions, and those questions may well need to be to the Mayor and the lead for economy, the politicians that lead on these matters. Thank you.
That's why I was saying that it's like task and finish group on skills and skills gaps and so on, but it's also wider than that, as you quietly say. It's about those people who haven't got any skills.
I think it's clear, Chairman, that I was raising that as a work topic. I wasn't identifying it for... I was raising it as a work topic.
Okay,
I wasn't taking it any further. And I did forget to add that we've already got, thank you to Susan Ford for putting some items on this work programme. We've already got one at the moment titled Low Skills and Long-Term... Is that unemployed? Long-term unemployed? Thank you. I would be grateful if whoever comes, it's listed as Gemma Marsh, but members would have to agree with me. I don't want to miss the opportunity that they really do speak to, as well as lots of general matters they will give us. I do want them to speak to the specifics of the 16 to 25 age group, because I was surprised that it was a lower percentage in Bolton than I expected it to be. It was even under 10% actually, our figures. And then to speak to the over 55 age group, because that's interesting, I think, for all of us. And then speak to, obviously, what worries me, what can be fairly sizable numbers of people who are aged between 26 and 55 who are just not in work. Thank you.
So if I can bring it to a close and ask, if you like...
Sorry, Chair, if we were just, I don't want to prolong it, but if we were asking for suggestions, can I flag up again the business about the airport that I...
Yeah, I was going to come to that, actually.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Okay,
So we need to... yes, go on. You haven't asked a question. I'll let you go.
It's just the, I don't know how it works, but the combined authority must have a work programme. And I'm just thinking about the correlation between what we do and what they're going to do. So if we've got a view of that, this should set that month before. I don't know, it's just an idea.
Yeah.
So we can see the whole gambit.
Yeah, I was doing some training with officers yesterday about the importance of forward planning with lead officers. It was done at the request of Eamon Boylan, the Chief Exec. So that is very much, you know, like we're saying, we do need to know to be able to plan people's work programmes.
that needs to be filled in. So we've got a short-term issue to get something in for next month, because if we don't do things on a regular basis, we'll get to the end of the year and we haven't done enough. It's all crammed in together.
Yeah.
But also, I think for the next meeting, and I'll come and sit down with you,
Yeah.
we need to plan out what is going to come to every single meeting until the end of the year. And whilst I accept there might be a bit of slippage in some areas, at least we've got a framework there. In terms of the next meeting, I'd like to have, if you like, agreement with the members of this committee what we should look at. I'm keen on the airport as well, actually. And in fact, not just the airport, but the enterprise zone as well, which all goes combined it within that. And I think, sometimes obviously it's difficult getting hold of people.
Possibly internationalisation.
Internationalisation, yes.
Alongside that, I don't know.
Yeah. But I think the impact of the enterprise zone is important. A few years ago, we had a tour on there, actually. I'm not necessarily advocating that again, but we got a great insight in terms of the possibilities for the enterprise, which we all benefit from, of course, in terms of rate subsidies. Yes, we did. Yeah. This was
the aspirations contained in that report.
Yeah, that's right. So Councillor Ali.
What struck me, Councillor, I think we need to have a chart with Andy Burnham on top and the rest. Right? So what's happening here? Because I think when you say the CA work programme, we are part of that CA work programme. We're one of those economy and business, it's got corporate and then housing and environment. So there's three, and they have standard committee as well as a resource committee. So there are already structures there. What we're baffled with is all the structures are there, but we don't know who's who there. So can you do a chart for us at the earliest possible opportunity so we get to know the geography of the structure and the functions around it? So that will clear us, So in terms of knowing you, knowing us, and the rest. So and you're making a song out of it, isn't it? So we need to know the GM structure, the CA structure. It's simply just, it's there, but it's fluid in our mind. We really need to know who's who. So can we have a chart?
You like a chart, don't you?
The other thing I think we should ask the chief executive and the mayor to come to the next meeting.
Yeah, that's heard.
Yeah. So we're going to. I can't remember. Will the open statement be announced by then?
No, it won't. The budget's on the 22nd of November, I think. But government will be looking to finalise the input from local places by the end of October. So we should have a fair understanding of what we're likely to get to.
We could have that together with the Northern Powerhouse brought in, and also their views, updated views on transport. Well, as transport's not harvested. So if we can request them today.
Yeah, I will let them know
December,
that they're expecting.
That's about 2 weeks after the statement.
Right.
Which is about enough time.
Yeah, it will be. So have we got sufficient now on our agenda?
Are we doing airport next time? Airport and internationalisation next time? Is that what you want?
Yeah.
But with the mayor and the chief exec attending to give possibly just at that stage it might just be a verbal update on progress, but answer any other questions that.
Well, it's from them. It's really understanding where they're up to, what their views are on the Northern Powerhouse, and also a first stab at what the autumn statement means for Greater Manchester.
Chair, I wasn't making a point before that I think the mayor and the chief exec ought to be here for every single meeting. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But as and when we've got something that's directly relevant to them, in relation to the airport thing, I frankly would welcome somebody senior from the airport.
No, absolutely.
That's part of it, so we can question them about their plans for development and its role as a regional growth.
And then I think, as I say, the key thing there afterwards, we have a detailed plan for going forwards, which we haven't got at the moment.
Yeah.
And last year there were gaps then, we get filled in at the last moment. We should know when these reports are coming through, and there's no excuse basically, as far as I'm concerned.
That's good. That's helpful.
Yeah.
No, it's not good, but it's helpful.
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry we've overrun today, but I thought it was important we set the scene, and thank you for some wonderful questions and observations. That's right.
I'll try not to say anything too